Good afternoon, Franz.
Hello.
Oh, finally you are here in Singapore.
Yeah.
Welcome, welcome. Waited a long time for this opportunity for you to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll be very excited, looking forward to the workshop. Yeah, they're starting from tonight. Okay, in this interview, we're going to touch a little bit on the trauma of sexuality and how does trauma of sexuality actually affect relationships and our lives. And I know this is actually a very sensitive topic. And yeah, it is so crucial to many people who suffered and saw trauma of sexuality in their process. Some of them can remember, some of them have totally no recollection. So through your many years of experience in psychotherapy works, in what ways does the trauma of sexuality affect an adult's life?
Yeah, I also was very surprised when I started with psychotherapy 20 years ago that it is so widespread.
Yes.
It's in so many cases. Only maybe in cases when you didn't expect it before and doing some therapy over years, and then it comes up, it shows up that something had happened. So it's a widespread phenomenon worldwide, I would think, and so it's a big challenge, really a big challenge also for on the social level.
Yes.
You need to reduce this epidemic of sexual abuse. On the other side, it's of course it's necessary for all of us to look at our own experiences. And because it is so widespread, it's a big taboo.
Yes.
And nobody, it's not so easy to touch this issue.
Yes.
And so it's also very shameful.
Yes.
The victim feels ashamed if you are a victim of sexual abuse.
Yes.
And of course also the perpetrators, they are ashamed. If it's come up, it's coming to the public,
yes.
and it's known in the family. So it's a big taboo, and so it's nearly impossible when it's happened to digest it or to do something with it, because it's all obscured. Yeah, it's hidden. Nobody talks about it.
Yes.
And it happens, and then after when it happened, it is as if it had not happened. Yeah.
Yes.
And what to do with that? If you are in a situation, let's say as a child, something happened to you, and afterwards, everybody who is involved is maybe your father, grandfather, your mother,
uncles, aunties.
Everybody does as if nothing had happened. Yeah?
Yes.
This is something you, as a child, you can say nobody makes you crazy.
Yes.
Because you experience something and oh yeah, it was not good, it was bad, it was awful, it was maybe first it was something that you were given some presents, and then you were consumed by the perpetrator, and afterwards nobody cares, and you're alone.
Yes.
It is so difficult. That means the only thing you can do as a child is to try to forget it. To try to forget about it, to try to not to believe yourself what you have experienced, because nobody, whenever you want to talk about it to anybody, so you would say you are a liar, it's not true, or in case if really it is admitted that somebody has happened, they will say you are to blame because you have you wanted it, and so it's so confusing, dynamic. So in the end, what you can say, it's on this psychological level, it's just absolutely confusing.
Yeah.
Because you can't know, can I believe myself? Who is trustful?
Yes.
And on the physical level, on the level of the body, your body reacts with disgust, with frozen states or drawing back, and so it's you have on the mental level, you have on the body level, and on the relational level, you have so many impacts on and consequences of that. And this is one of the reasons why we have to really, if you address it in psychotherapy, we have to be very careful and seeing the different layers of it.
Yes, yes.
And really let our clients all the time they need to realize the different consequences that the sexual abuse has. And your body, and your feelings, and your mental state, and the relationships.
So can I, also through my experience when I started this work since 2 years ago, I realized that it's really quite rampant. and it took a lot of people by shock. And half the people have no knowledge, and after a while they remembered. Yeah. But there are some people who really totally cannot recall, but their body remembers.
The body remembers.
Yeah, the body remembers. And you know, so can I say that most of the issues, like some clients, they come and see me, they have sexual issues with their partners, with their husband or partners, and very often behind it is sexual trauma of sexuality. So is it true that any related problems has got to do with the sexual organs, or the healthiness of their sexuality as an adult, that it has got to do with trauma of sexuality quite often?
It's quite often the case, and this is the way how we get aware.
Yeah.
It's only maybe it's the only way to get aware that something had happened when your body reacts, or you are in a constant queries and constant conflicts. For example, if a woman is a constant conflict with a man because she's afraid of a man, and every sexual contact with males is disgusting.
Yes,
so,
yes. Or painful.
Or
Yeah.
painful, or
sometimes frightening.
yeah, it's and they try to protect them. And similar also to male persons. Then
Yes.
They have difficulties in sexual contact with females because they then remember that something had happened, may have happened, or the body remembers. And so it's like it's often in psychotherapy. We have firsthand we have our symptoms, and when we go on and explore the symptoms and looking what's behind, what's back there. And it's good to know that a lot of symptoms can result from sexual...
It's really a lot.
Yeah, a lot of symptoms, many
I
symptoms.
have clients who, various symptoms, they do an intervention, and often the trauma of sexuality shows up in their process.
Yeah, especially, for example, one example is if somebody is drinking too much alcohol, especially women. Whenever I see that women are drinking so much alcohol, I know that behind there must be something with sexuality.
Really?
Yeah, this is
okay.
something. In the males,
And why is
because
that so?
male are more used in the male, the gender role of males is more used to that they drink alcohol. But if a woman is drinking too much alcohol, then for me it's a clear sign.
How do you explain that?
Because she tries to forget, to drink the alcohol, or to suppress the feelings.
Is it just alcohol, or it can be any substance abuse?
Of course, medication can also.
Medication.
Other types of drugs, but for me, just as an example,
Right.
from some symptoms, women drinking, behind there is sexual violence.
Smoking?
Yes, also, all sorts of addictions.
And through your experience, can you also kind of conclude that for those who are suffering from gender identity or gender confusion disorder, most of the time it has got to do with trauma, sexuality, through experience?
Yeah, but it's a very sensitive issue, because you know that those who are homosexual or lesbian, they don't want gays, they don't want to be blamed that this is something coming out from trauma, but most of them will say, "Oh, it's my nature," and so. But it depends. And if you really want to have a deeper look on your sexuality, and could be very useful. Could be very useful to explore it and say, okay, maybe behind there is some sexual trauma too.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm sure your advice would be for them to come and work on themselves and do process and heal from this trauma. And for people who has gone through process, how do we know they have totally healed from this trauma? Are there any signs that shows?
Okay, but this phrase "totally healed" is something I think it's
okay.
It's not so easy to say, but really, but it's a step-by-step process, and then you can realize that at the first hand that you are more why your body reacts like this. Yeah, that you get very make a correlation between the symptoms and this trauma, and then step by step, I think it's. First, I give you an example. This is for a woman I was working very many years. Now she said, now I would be prepared to get a baby, to become pregnant, and for the first time in my life, I really would say there shouldn't be an obstacle for me to become a mother.
Okay.
Because before she couldn't do that. She couldn't tolerate her body.
And the trauma is trauma of sexuality.
Yeah, the body couldn't tolerate it. Now she's
ready
to say, okay, if I got pregnant now, I would accept it and I would like to be a mother.
Right.
Something.
Okay, so this may be some clear signs.
Yeah.
Or maybe the symptoms maybe go away, or
Yeah, of course. If you have symptoms, skin,
Yes.
or you have infections,
Yes,
all those
yes.
sorts of things, and that when this calms down and when the body calms down, there's a clear symptoms, a clear signal that you're on the right way, that you are now doing well in your psychotherapy and then have really good progress.
But it's interesting that you mentioned about skin, because this is also my experience. Most people with skin issues, they have sexual trauma. Is it a conclusion?
It's a conclusion because
It can be eczema or hives or okay, all right.
Because this is the contact, the body
Ah,
contact.
yes.
And you try to avoid body contact. Or your skin, you can't withdraw with your mentally. You can withdraw, you can dissociate, but your body
the skin
stays.
shows.
The body has to be there, and the skin is the contact with the. You can't avoid the contact with the perpetrator because he touches you. Because
right.
that you can't avoid, so the skin reacts.
Many people here in Singapore have skin issues.
Yeah.
Many. Okay, so how does it affect a child? If a child has been sexually abused as a baby, for example, how does it affect a child in their childhood? Do you have any experience?
Yeah, they develop illnesses. With vessels or
vessels.
Yeah, they can, or even a skin issues or coughing, something like this.
Coughing?
If it's oral sexual abuse.
If it's oral sexual abuse, okay.
For example, and then maybe also the child gets hyperactive.
So it's like ADHD?
Yeah, could also be a consequence of that.
Okay.
Or they are dissociated and they are not able to, at school, they are not able to concentrate or focus.
Okay. Wow. It's really a very, very...
some become aggressive and others they withdraw. This is the two ways you deal with it. Others go out and they fight, and others they withdraw and they avoid every contact or try to be alone.
Right. So, how does a mother's own sexual abuse affect their children?
Yeah, it can start very early.
Let's say if their children is not sexually abused, but the mother is, so does it affect?
Yes, it can start very early because already during pregnancy, if the mother's sexual body region is not, she's not in contact with that, so the pregnancy becomes difficult. And also then the birth, because giving birth is also a high amount of excitations and emotions that are stirred up. And so the birth process can become very difficult. Afterwards, body contact, afterwards breastfeeding, and so all sorts of things very old. And for example, I have an example, but one client of mine, she said when she first smelled her son, it smelled like the grandfather. She had the smell of the grandfather and smell the baby, so you can imagine how difficult for her is to accept the baby, to love the baby, to take it to her, and not to.
So then there is trauma of love.
Yeah, and then not to be triggered. Yeah.
Right.
That the baby triggers the mother.
So then there is the distance, or they have to be.
And then mother dissociates, and the baby is not able to get this bonding relationship with the mother.
And then the rest of the symptoms goes in a vicious cycle.
This becomes a very vicious cycle.
Okay, so let's say a client does a constellation, a process, and they first saw their own sexual abuse in a constellation they have absolutely no memory of. How do you support the client when, for example, during the process, then they remembered? So at the end of the process, they remembered. How do we support them?
First of all,
three groups. One is if they remember, the other one is they do not remember and they reject the facts that they see. And number 3 is they do not remember, but they are open to allowing memories to surface. So these 3 groups.
First thing I think is very important for us when we do constellation works is it's a tool that you can use as a client. It's not for us as therapists that we say we use this tool in order to detect sexual abuse.
Sure.
It's not up to us.
Right.
It must be. It needs to be the client that wants to use our tool we offer them in order to really get more clearness.
Yes.
And so whenever it shows up, never push any pressure to our clients.
Yes.
But it shows that if you want to go deeper or explore more, you can do it. If you say, oh no, that is not possible, it could not be, so it's also
okay.
It's okay for them. You shouldn't put any pressure on
Of course.
and say, you see now the constellation shows you're accused. That's of no good,
Yes.
because first of all, of course, our survival strategies want to deny it because it's so blaming, it's so shameful, and we feel so guilty, and you don't want to blame your father or grandfather or mother. As a child, you don't want to do it. So very often, first of all, you have to deal with the trauma of love in order. Then you can go to the next step and say, okay, now I realize I was not that loved person, a child as thought I was before, and this was also involved sexual abuse in my experience.
So then if it shows in a constellation, how can a client or therapist differentiate if the information shown is mother's memory or is it the child's actual experience? Because through symbiosis, the entanglement is huge, and sometimes we remember the mother's memory. So how do we differentiate whether it's the child's or the mother's?
It's possible that it mixes and merges, and so you see you can't do it in one step. You need to have more constellations
and intentions,
and more intentions, and also maybe one of your intention is then that you say, I want to get clear if it's my own sexual abuse or it was my mother's. So it's the more you are interested in sorting it out, the better then your intentions become. The clearer your intentions become. Maybe the first signs are coming from another side. You have an intention. You didn't think about sexual abuse, and it shows up. And then you can say, okay, maybe this is an issue, and then go on and explore it and try to get clear what's mine and what's my mother's.
Okay. So do you have any word of advice for those who are already embracing this truth of their childhood and they are undergoing healing now? Do you have any word of advice for them?
Just, I think it's a great challenge still. And sexual abuse is really a great challenge to accept it and to be very patient with yourself. Don't push yourself under the pressure, but be aware that a lot of your survival strategy always try to deny again and again and again. So it really needs to strengthen your healthy eye, that you are confident in yourself and you really rely on yourself, and so that your survival strategies can really come down with this issue too.
And I think in your book, Trauma, Fear and Love, you do actually share some cases on trauma of sexuality.
There's a lot of
Yeah.
cases in that.
Yes, yes. So, love is confused with sexuality and,
Love and-
yeah. Okay, so thank you, Franz. Thank you. It's been very, very good information, and especially when, the last 2 years when I started this book, that more and more cases are showing up. So, if you have, understood what where Franz is coming from and from his experience or the possible symptoms, you may be curious to explore, be curious to take a little look at into what's unconsciously suppressed or repressed that may have happened to you. And of course, you can always contact us, and in Singapore here, if you're in Singapore, contact us and find out a little bit more about these works, and you can start to do therapy and do works on your whatever symptoms that it may be possibly related. Okay, so thank you very much, Franz.
Yeah. Christine.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.